Well, good morning. These are 3 reminders for your first paper, which is due this week. And so I want to just go through these and also mention a couple of other things that folks have asked me over email. And before I even get into these 3, I should also mention that you should email me if you'd like me to look at a draft. If you just have a simple question on the paper that you want me to answer, send me an email. I'll be happy to answer whatever questions that you have. I'm happy to take a look at drafts. But these 3 points, I think, will help as you finish up this first paper, okay? So let me go through these briefly, and then I'll talk about each one in a little bit more detail after I put the whiteboard down. So for number 1, as I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago now, make sure to read over the directions. The directions on Blackboard really do map out everything that you need to know for the paper. The formatting is in there, the length, how to set up the header on it. So read through that. Like I said, I do write longer directions, but I do that just so that you've got a sense of everything that I'm looking for in the paper. So just read through those. And again, if there's anything that doesn't make sense or that you're not sure about, just send me an email and I'll be happy to clarify anything that you're not sure about. Now for number 2, make sure you check your transition sentences. Now this would be really throughout the paper, but particularly for the middle of the essay. How do your paragraphs look? If they're a little bit too long, look for those parts where there's a natural break, where a new idea is starting and you therefore can start a new paragraph. If you're not sure about that either, you can send it to me and I can make those suggestions, but it's really difficult, especially in the first paper of the semester like this, to be able sometimes to determine where those breaks should be. And so if your tendency is to write longer body paragraphs, take a look to see what those transitions are. You want to give yourself more room. If you're talking about a particular experience at work and then you're switching over to more details on that experience, give yourself some space. Make what looked like one long paragraph into 2. Remember what I mentioned earlier about this being a 5 or 6 paragraph essay. It could be certainly longer than that. It could be up to 7 paragraphs depending on where the breaks happen in those body paragraphs. So, take a look at that. And then lastly, for number 3, look at the conclusion. The conclusion for a lot of papers, especially this early in the semester, can be difficult to work out because, again, as I said in one of the other videos, our tendency and the way that we're taught often with a lot of writing classes is to focus so much on the introduction and the main idea that we start to lose focus as we get a little bit further into the essay. And what happens in a lot of cases is that the conclusion is maybe the very last thing that we look at, the very last thing that we edit or even write at all. And so sometimes it doesn't quite match up with the rest of the essay. Now, in the case of this one, as I mentioned before, you're welcome to talk about Mike Rose and any connections of your experience to Rose's experience that you found as you were writing your paper and then reading his essay. You're also welcome, certainly, to comment on his ideas on work and democracy in the last paragraph. But one thing I do want to caution you about is don't leave out your own voice in that last paragraph. Even if you're commenting on Rose and giving some final thoughts on him, you can certainly still do that in the final paragraph. But you can also do it in such a way that you can still make it part of your story. So in other words, if you're writing a narrative about your first job experience at, let's say, Jewel or Target, which I know some of you are writing about, then don't leave yourself out in that last paragraph. Find a way to include some final reflections on your experience there. And even if you're tying it back into Rose, you still want your voice to be heard in that final paragraph. And make sure also that the final paragraph is as detailed and even as engaging as the other components of the paper. As I said, we're often taught only to focus on the introduction and the body paragraphs, and we often forget that conclusion is the last thing that somebody's going to read in any piece of writing that you do. So you want it to be memorable, and you also want to avoid getting too, let me think of a good word for this, too preachy at the end. There's a lot of papers that we write, I've certainly written them in my time, where we try to make the ending almost melodramatic, where we try to give a lesson to the reader at the very end. And you really don't have to do that with this one. Again, the ending in this should be about you, any final reflections you have on the work that you've written about over the course of the paper, any final reflections that you have about Rose himself and his ideas. So keep that in mind with the ending of this essay. Keep it consistent with the ideas that you have throughout the rest of the paper. And again, if there's anything that you're not sure about, in terms of how it's looking or how the ending is working in relation to the rest of your paper, send it to me. I've already sent drafts and ideas back to folks who sent pieces in over the weekend, over the last few days, but there's still plenty of time to get me any drafts that you'd like me to take a look at, and I'll be happy to give you what feedback I can as you finish up this first paper. Now, the other thing I want to mention is, as I just said, it is your first paper. It is not going to be perfect. There really is no such thing as a perfect paper, a perfect essay, a perfect book. So keep that in mind. Do the best that you can. That's all I'm asking you to do. Take your time with it. Ask for help. If there's someone else at home or someone else, a friend online that you can send it to, you can make an appointment also with the Writing Center on campus, a virtual meeting or a virtual session where a person could help you take a look at that paper. So take advantage of those opportunities. Like I said, people are happy to help. We're happy to give you some feedback and some suggestions on your assignment as you're finishing it off. Okay, so just to sum up, like I said, read over those directions. They will help you as you put the paper together. Take a look at any of the other suggestions in the other videos that I put up over the last couple of weeks. Later this week, we'll be getting into the readings for paper number 2. So that'll be the next video that I post. Will be some details on that assignment. And it is going to be an extension of this one. We're going to build on some of the ideas and even some of the themes of this particular assignment, and then we'll develop those into paper number 2. But for now, we just want to focus on paper number 1. Again, it's due this week, so please let me know if you have any questions on it or if you want me to read a draft. All right, so I'll talk to you in a couple of days, and good luck in your writing. I hope you enjoy it too. That's one other thing I want to mention before I sign off here. It should be a fun process. I don't want you to feel anxious. I want you really to do the best you can and come up with some stories that you find interesting. You're certainly going to learn more about yourself and your habits and your practices at work by exploring them and describing them in this paper in much the same way that Mike Rose does. So I hope you enjoy that process of discovery, because that's what writing is all about. Okay, so I'll talk to you again in a couple of days, and please, like I said, get in touch if you have any questions on this paper.